This is my Fujifilm X-H2S, and it's sitting in the box because I'm about to sell it. And I bought it a year and a half ago. And so I thought maybe this would be a good final moment to sort of recap the good, the bad, and why I'm selling it. If you're seeing more and more content creators, photographers that you follow selling Fujifilm, there's a reason. And there's actually multiple reasons. So I compiled the list. And so you're gonna have to excuse me if I'm looking at my screen for this video, but I just want to give you a heads up in case you're thinking of getting a Fujifilm camera. It might be the best camera you can get, and it might not be the best camera you get. So I'm gonna just sort of give you lay of the land, and then why I'm sort of giving this to a new owner, so to speak. So I started my photography journey after I got a drone, and I really enjoyed creating drone footage, and I got invited to certain events because of my drone footage. And I thought, okay, you know what? I saw a friend of mine who creates videos for 20 years now for companies, for individuals, for governments, for hospitals. And I borrowed his camera and a few lenses. And I went on a trip to Slovenia. You can see the video. I'll link it in the description or in one of the corners. And I just really enjoyed using it as a sort of on-the-ground perspective. I didn't include it in the video. It's mostly drone footage, I believe. But that was my first time actually using an on-the-ground camera, right? A traditional camera. And so I thought, okay, you know what? While I'm still working in the corporate world, in the weekends, I want to get myself a camera, capture family events. And then eventually I got more and more requests. And as I left the corporate world a year ago almost, this has now become my full-time profession. And now we're at the point where Fujifilm is just no longer on the level that I need to sort of deliver on. And so I'm going to go through the reasons why I got it and the reasons why I'm getting rid of it, okay? I got it because it's the best all-rounder at the time. It was the best all-rounder at the time. It can deliver up to 6.2K. It's a hybrid camera, fast enough sort of burst rates if I need it. 26 megapixels is more than enough for most usage. It was the best value. My alternative was the Sony a7 IV, but the 4K 60 crop, 1.5 times crop was a deal breaker for me. I didn't want to deal with that, and there were some reports of overheating, which hopefully have now been fixed, if they have been fixed. And everything was fine until recently I got into more high-level events and deliverables, and so here are my issues. Hear me out. If you want to, you can watch this at 2 times speed. I talk a lot. The first and most obvious is the autofocus issues. My issues weren't really present until firmware 6.0 and then went down. Now we're on 7.10 at the time of watching this video in the beginning of 2025. Most of those autofocus issues have been fixed. And when you're doing a talking head like this, nothing will distract the Fujifilm X-H2S anymore. So that's a positive. And if you are behind the camera constantly monitoring it, then you're also most likely fine. The issue is when you need to put this on a tripod and leave it there and use another camera. So you're doing a static camera or you're doing 2 camera interviews. I can't trust it, and that's a big issue. Recently, 7.10 also introduced some issues with the flickerless shutter settings, where even with mechanical shutter, I would get some banding in the images, and 1/4 of the image almost looked like a linear gradient, and that was an issue. I didn't like it. I don't know when they're gonna fix it. The situation with Fujifilm is they take months to fix issues. And that generally highlights my next point, firmware issues. Firmware 6 brought up a whole bunch of issues, which they have now fixed, except for the one I made a video, and once again, that'll be in one of the corners, with issues with DJI's Ronin stabilizers. And that's now all across the board of their current lineup. You can't use your Fujifilm controls on the camera, and you can't link the camera to the gimbal, start and stop recording. And it doesn't affect all of them. Some of them still work for some miraculous reasons, but mine isn't one of them. So I couldn't use my RS3 Mini with it. I had to manually start and stop recording, which put wear and tear on the motor, which now needed a full replacement. I've sold that gimbal now as well. That really points towards issues with Fujifilm itself. A small team here in Hungary. Servicing hasn't exactly been good. One of my lenses didn't function properly, and it took 2 months for them to send me to a company which then sent the lens to Fujifilm Hungary, who then sent it to Fujifilm Portugal because they say they work better than Fujifilm Poland. And it took 2 months for my lens to get back to me. No support, no replacement whatsoever. Yeah, that was not nice. 2 months without a lens is unacceptable for professional use, and I think you're seeing where I'm going with this. Fujifilm continuously releases new bodies. Their sales, at least here in Hungary, and I spoke to them directly, over half of their sales comes from Instax. The other half, they get it mostly from small consumer cameras. The hip cameras like the XM5 that they recently released. That's really where their income lies, at least here in this region. And so their focus isn't professionals. They of course strive to become one of the big four if they were to join, next to Canon, Nikon, and Sony. But yeah, that's another issue, is the company itself isn't equipped to deal with hardware or software issues that have been highlighted by numerous people recently. 26 megapixels, even though I mentioned that it's good for most things, there are situations where I really want a larger 40 to 50 megapixel sensor. Whether that's studio work, whether that's something like sports where you may not be able to get closer to the action and you need to be able to crop a little bit, wildlife, nature, etc. You can imagine, I think it's natural for people to want larger megapixel count. That comes at a sacrifice on the other end, so we can talk about that at another time. Video issues. Yeah, apart from the focus issues that I had, I've also recently noticed that the white balance, which I was okay doing auto white balance most of the times. Unfortunately, I'm not in the situation where I can always do a gray card when we get to a spot and I already need to be rolling. I do some work in media as well, so I don't really have the opportunity to get out and do a quick white balance check. Auto white balance worked very well on Fujifilm until 7.10, and I've pointed this out. It now shifts, the moment there's a light shining on it, it changes the white balance drastically, and so you need to actually set it manually, and I don't always have that option. So again, just disappointment over disappointment each time they released firmware updates. F-Log 2, I found it to be noisy during daytime. If somebody stands in the shadows and you're interviewing them because you don't want them to be scorched by the 40-degree summer heat, you'll have noise in your footage. And so F-Log 2 and F-Log 2C is really only for specific uses where you have controlled lighting. And so that, to me, just puts log footage at a disadvantage. Maybe that's each their own. Your mileage may vary, but I just found other brands' log footage to handle standard scenarios better. And there are, of course, specialist cameras that, you know, like the FX3 that has the second native ISO at 12,800, and you can even film things at absolute darkness and get usable footage. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And on the topic of specifically video stuff, the reason why I'm selling it is because you can't change subject detection on or off once you start recording. And I can't emphasize how many times I've highlighted this issue. Let's say you're filming somebody alone on the stage. Fujifilm now does a great job of highlighting that person, keeping them in focus. Then a second person comes on stage, and this is a real life scenario I had to deal with, where I couldn't switch off the subject detection, and now it was bouncing between two people on the two sides of a small stage. And at times it would hunt and focus on the wall, and then it would go back to the first person, and it was a nightmare. Half the footage was unusable after that. So I had to stop recording, and at times you cannot afford to stop recording. If you've got a political event where you have 15 seconds of somebody's time, you can't just say, oh, I'm sorry, I need to stop rolling, switch off subject detection or switch on subject detection and then start rolling again. These things are standards on other brands. If you can do it, let me know. I'll admit I'm wrong, but I've tried it. I asked people in groups. Nobody can switch on or off subject detection during recording on an X-H2S. So Fuji, fix it for your future customers. Lenses. I don't think the lenses are cut out for major video work. I think Fujifilm was primarily focused on delivering good atmospheric lenses for photography. For video, it still sometimes tends to just be sluggish or loud. On the newer linear motor ones are really, really good, but generally they need more lenses. They need to bring out more lenses and less bodies. That's really my advice for Fujifilm. Just focus on firmware and lenses if you really want to enter that top 3 market. I think I mentioned DJI Ronin issues. The Fujifilm X app, it can be good and it can be bad. It's on my good list and it's on my bad list as well. Don't trust the shutter count, because I advertised my camera with 100,000 shutter actuations, when in reality I checked 3 different tools, and it was at 33,000. So huge resale value drop if you put your camera on as 100,000 shutter actuations. But the Fujifilm X app is a good thing, and we'll cover it as well, because there's one particular function that it does better than all the other apps that I know of. Battery life is okay. It does drop after a while, and my biggest gripe with it is that you don't have a percentage. That's the same on Nikon bodies as well. That you don't have a percentage. You can go in the playback menu, and then you'll see, as you flick through the different display options, you'll see the battery percentage in the top right. But then you go back to shooting and you don't know what battery percentage you are at, and that's just unacceptable in 2025. How do you not know what battery percentage you are at? So again, that's just a minor frustration when you don't have the possibility of plugging in and you're wondering whether you're on 30% or whether you're on 3%, because it sort of looks the same. Due to the X-Trans sensor, there are good sides and bad sides, but obviously if you want to use Lightroom, because you use several different brands of cameras, you want to use all your sort of catalog in one app, it doesn't understand the X-Trans files without sort of a worming effect. You can use Capture One, which will do a much better job. And there's also a plugin which will convert your files, your RAW files, and make it understand it like a traditional Bayer sensor. It's just extra hassle. And I don't really understand how Fujifilm doesn't sort of have a collaboration with Adobe, for instance, to have natively better understanding of their files. No dual hybrid camera card slots. Sony, for instance, does have SD as well as CF Express cards, 2 of them in almost all their recent cameras. And so you have the flexibility of switching to SD, but you can pop in 1 SD and 1 CF Express card, or 2 CF Express or 2 SD cards. Just all the options available. The more options you have, the better it is for professional use. And I think you're sort of seeing where I'm going with this. When I got this camera, I was perfectly fine with what it does. Now that I rely on it to make money and make a living, as well as a reputation on the line, I can't trust my gear. And I think that's ultimately what I wanted to highlight in this video, is if you can't trust your gear, it's game over. And I was very lucky enough to be invited to a government project that took me 5 days to the Middle East, in a very highly stressful situation, 12 to 13 hours of filming a day. Project went very well, I'm very glad. But immediately upon receiving that call, the first thing I did is I rang up my contact at Sony. And I said, can you give me 2 cameras for 5 days? And I think ultimately that's when I was like, okay, I need to take a few pictures of these devices, the XH2S and the 7 lenses that I have, and just start selling them. Because if I can't trust my gear, and the first thing I do when I get called for a very important project is effectively rent out a different camera, it's game over. So if you are considering getting a camera and you're a Canon or a Sony or a Nikon shooter, and you're like, oh, I would love to have something a little bit more lightweight, as long as your money isn't dependent on it, go for Fujifilm. Do it. If it's for family, if it's for traveling, if it's for your hobby, if it's for sort of side hustles, do it. It's great camera. Best color science you will get, if they fix the flickering and auto white balance recently introduced in version 7.10. But for any sort of detailed video work, as well as, Fuji still does suffer from false positives in photography. So you do burst shots, especially with something like the 5140, which is otherwise a great lens. But if you do something north of 10 frames a second, you'll go home and you're like, wait, that's actually not in focus. And it does say on the screen that it's in focus. It's not in focus. So yeah, false positives are still a thing, unfortunately, on Fuji bodies. And that's, I think, an architecture problem. I think it's deeply in the sensor and the processor and what it's communicating with the linear motors and what data it's getting back from the lens into the camera. There's a discrepancy probably of timing, and it just misses the shots that you think you've nailed because the green box is moving perfectly exactly where it's supposed to. So yeah, and I think it's fair to mention what I'm going to miss from having a Fuji camera, and that's the color science, as I mentioned. Film simulations are fun, especially when you go on holiday and you just want to post straight out of camera photos. Certainly that's something that's going to be missing. The build quality is great. My first XH2S was faulty out of the box, but the retailer swapped it very kindly, but the rear command dial didn't work. Apart from this, I had no build quality issues. My only criticism is the hot shoe on top of the camera. It's painted black on the XH2Ss, and it just fades straight away and looks worn. 6.2K open gate, very, very welcome, although the readout speed, I believe, changes of the sensor. But overall, it's always good to have an open gate option. Now more Fujifilm bodies actually have it. I think the XS20 also has that option, so you can get that for half the price pretty much. And yeah, the C1 to C7 dial on top of the camera is very, very good. I've set it up for 3 photo modes, and then the last 4 are video modes, and I can just switch between different frame rates and log options immediately. So the C1 to C7 dial on top is really, really good. Not impossible to replicate on other cameras, but it's just good to have it there. And I think my solution to this, I'm gonna conclude this video with, is I would still like to use a Fujifilm camera in the future, just for traveling and having it for family moments. And I think ultimately that's the appeal, the mass appeal of an X100 series camera. So eventually, if business is booming, hopefully, I'll have the opportunity to maybe get an X100 series camera, maybe even secondhand, and I'll be happy with it. It can still take beautiful quality videos, as long as you don't really need to run around and get a stabilizer for it, which would be incompatible anyway. But ultimately, yes, those are my reasons for selling it, and I'm hoping that the person who's buying it is going to be very happy with it. I'm selling all my gear with, as good condition as I can. But thank you for watching this. This is just a explanation on why I'm leaving Fujifilm, because there's more and more videos like this, and I think it's fair after a company has spent months fixing very urgent issues and months even acknowledging issues, for them to get a bit of a reality check. So for professional usage, don't rely on Fujifilm. If you are using it for side hustle / family occasions, get a Fujifilm. Greatest value you can get, especially on the XH2S. Is a really good value if you can get one secondhand or on sale. And as to what is next for me, I've got a few more days to make a decision. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you are new to this channel, feel free to check out my other videos. I could tell you a million times to subscribe because it does help. This is a sort of side hustle for me. I don't have nearly as much time as I thought I would to make videos, but I'm putting one together now, comparing the Nikon Z8 and the Sony A1 Mark II, both of which I've had over a week with. So yeah, thanks so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.